The first time Thomas noticed the black Mercedes parked in his driveway, he assumed it was a simple mistake, a visitor to the neighborhood perhaps who had pulled in momentarily to check directions. He was running late for work anyway, so he simply maneuvered his Toyota around it and headed off, expecting the vehicle to be gone when he returned. It wasn't. In fact, the sleek sedan remained there until well past 7 that evening. Thomas, a software developer who worked remotely 3 days a week, had specifically purchased this modest ranch home in the suburbs for its privacy and spacious driveway. After a decade living in cramped apartment complexes where parking was a blood sport, having his own concrete rectangle felt like winning the lottery. "Excuse me," Thomas called out, spotting a woman with a perfect blonde bob retrieving shopping bags from the Mercedes trunk. "I think you might be confused. This is my driveway." The woman, mid-40s, dressed in athleisure, wear that probably cost more than Thomas's monthly car payment, barely glanced his way. "I'll just be a minute," she replied, her tone making it clear that the conversation was, in her mind, already over. "Actually, I'd appreciate it if you move your car now," Thomas said, his natural conflict avoidance battling with mounting frustration. "I need to get my own vehicle in." The woman straightened, her expression a perfect blend of surprise and indignation, as if she couldn't believe someone was actually challenging her. "Do you know who I am? I'm Patricia Westfield. I just moved into the Colonial on the corner." She gestured vaguely toward the largest house in the neighborhood, a recently renovated 4-bedroom that had sold for nearly twice what Thomas had paid for his home. "Nice to meet you, Patricia. I'm Thomas, and this is still my driveway." Patricia's perfectly lined lips formed a thin smile. "Look, Thomas, I'm heading to a charity board meeting in 20 minutes. Your driveway is simply more convenient for me to unload these donations. My circular drive is being redone, and it's such a hassle to carry everything from the garage. I'm sure you understand." She hoisted another shopping bag from the trunk. "Besides, you don't seem to be using it right now anyway." Thomas stood dumbfounded as Patricia continued unloading bags. The sheer audacity rendered him momentarily speechless. By the time he found his voice again, she was already walking away, her designer sneakers crunching on his gravel walkway. "Please don't park here again," he called after her. Without turning around, Patricia raised a manicured hand in what might have been acknowledgement or dismissal. Thomas couldn't tell which. He spent the evening stewing, recounting the encounter to his sister May during their weekly video call. May, a corporate attorney with a take-no-prisoners attitude that Thomas had always envied, was livid on his behalf. "You need to tell her next time," she insisted, "or block her in. People like that only understand consequences." Thomas nodded, though the thought of confrontation made his stomach churn. She'll probably realize it was inappropriate and find somewhere else to park tomorrow. But Thomas hadn't accounted for Patricia Westfield's remarkable sense of entitlement. The next morning, as he sat at his kitchen table with his first cup of coffee, the distinctive purr of a luxury engine drew his attention. Through the window, he watched in disbelief as the black Mercedes pulled smoothly into his driveway once more. This time, Patricia didn't even acknowledge the house as she stepped out of her car, locked it with a casual beep-beep of the key fob, and strode purposefully down the street toward the local coffee shop, designer handbag swinging from her elbow. Thomas set his mug down so hard that coffee sloshed onto his keyboard. The incident wasn't a misunderstanding or a one-time convenience. It was a pattern forming before his eyes, one that Patricia clearly had no intention of breaking. And in that moment, something inside mild-mannered Thomas quietly snapped. 3 days and 4 separate parking incidents later, Thomas had documented everything. Each Mercedes appearance was photographed, time-stamped, and added to a growing folder on his phone labeled "Driveway Thief." He tried leaving notes, ignored. Positioning his own car strategically, she simply parked behind him, boxing him in, and even installed a small private property sign, which disappeared by the following morning. "You need to call the police and have her towed," Mai insisted during their latest call. Thomas could hear the exasperation in his sister's voice. "I tried," Thomas admitted, rubbing his temples. "They said it's a civil matter since she's not blocking public access. They suggested I put up a gate." Thomas had actually looked into gates. The cheapest was nearly $3,000, not including installation, all because one entitled neighbor couldn't respect boundaries. What frustrated him most was how Patricia had escalated from quick stops to treating his driveway as her personal parking space. Just yesterday, the Mercedes had remained there for over 8 hours while she was presumably at work. Thomas had been forced to park on the street, earning him a warning from the neighborhood association about violating the no street parking covenant between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. The final straw came on Friday evening. Thomas arrived home from grocery shopping to find not only Patricia's Mercedes in his driveway, but also a silver BMW SUV parked at an angle behind it. Through his living room window, he could see lights blazing from Patricia's Colonial and hear the distant thump of music. She was hosting a party and his driveway had become her guest parking. Thomas dropped his grocery bags on the kitchen counter and made an impulsive decision. He picked up his phone. "My, remember how Dad left me all those landscaping supplies when he downsized? How quickly can you get here with your truck?" His sister's voice brightened immediately. "I can be there tomorrow morning." "What are we doing?" "Something that requires a lawyer present, just in case." The next morning dawned bright and clear. Thomas had barely slept, his mind racing with plans and second thoughts. But when he peered through his blinds and saw the Mercedes still parked in his driveway, had she actually left it overnight? His resolve hardened. Maya arrived at 7, her pickup truck loaded with supplies from her own garage renovation project. Behind her, a second truck pulled in, driven by her husband Ryan, who worked in construction. His vehicle contained the remainder of their father's abandoned landscaping projects, bags of cement, tools, and most importantly, 6 pallets of decorative paving bricks. "Are you sure about this?" May asked, handing Thomas a coffee and a travel mug. "It's not too late to just have a stern conversation." Thomas took a sip and gestured toward the Mercedes. "I tried talking. She doesn't listen. Besides, I've checked with the county. I'm well within my rights to improve my own property. As your attorney, I should advise caution," Mai said, then broke into a mischievous grin. "As your sister, I say let's get to work before Sleeping Beauty wakes up." For the next 3 hours, Thomas, May, and Ryan worked efficiently. They measured and marked the area, established the proper slope for drainage, and laid a thin foundation of compacted gravel around the Mercedes. Ryan, who had experience with hardscaping, directed the operation with professional precision. "Remember, we're not touching her car," Thomas reminded them repeatedly. "Not even a fingerprint on it." By mid-morning, curious neighbors had begun to gather at the edges of the property. Some offered cold drinks, others brought folding chairs to watch the spectacle. Nobody seemed particularly surprised by the identity of the offending vehicle's owner. "She complained to the HOA that my birdhouse was the wrong shade of taupe," one neighbor confided to Thomas, and she reported the Gibsons for having their trash cans out 12 minutes past collection time. Another neighbor, an elderly man who had lived on the street for decades, shuffled over and helped place bricks. "Been watching this all week," he said, expertly tapping a brick into place with his rubber mallet. About time somebody stood up to her. It was nearly noon when Patricia finally emerged from her house, designer sunglasses perched on her nose despite the cloudy day, phone pressed to her ear. She was halfway down the street before she registered the crowd gathered around Thomas's driveway. When she turned and saw what was happening, her conversation abruptly ended. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, marching toward them with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. Thomas straightened up, brick dust coating his work gloves. "Home improvement project." Patricia managed to back her Mercedes out with theatrical precision, revving the engine unnecessarily as she navigated the partially bricked driveway. She paused just long enough to roll down her window and deliver what she clearly thought was a devastating parting shot. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. My husband is on the city council and my brother-in-law is a judge." Her smile was razor-sharp. "Enjoy your little project while you can." As she peeled away, the gathered neighbors exchanged knowing glances. Thomas merely shrugged and turned back to his work. The threat might have intimidated him a week ago, but something had shifted inside him. For the first time in years, he felt like he was standing up for himself, rather than stepping aside to avoid conflict. "Should I be worried?" he asked Mai quietly. His sister snorted. "Her husband lost his council seat in the last election. I checked before I came over. And the only judge in her family is her cousin who oversees traffic court in the next county. She's bluffing." With the Mercedes gone, the project accelerated. Ryan directed a small brigade of willing neighbors, transforming what had begun as a petty act of revenge into a genuine community effort. By sundown, the driveway sported a handsome brick border running its entire length, the ornamental pattern adding both character and a clear statement. This space was claimed and cared for. Thomas ordered pizza for everyone as a thank you, and the impromptu gathering stretched into the evening. Neighbors who had lived side by side for years without more than a passing greeting now swapped stories about their encounters with Patricia and other neighborhood characters. Through their conversations, Thomas realized how isolated he had been, working from home and keeping to himself. "We should do this more often," suggested Helen, a retired teacher from 2 doors down. "Maybe a monthly block party when the weather's nice." "I'd host the first one," Thomas offered, surprised by his own enthusiasm. The weekend passed without any sign of Patricia or her Mercedes. Thomas began to think that perhaps she had gotten the message and found another parking spot for her luxury vehicle. By Monday morning, he was feeling satisfied with the outcome and the unexpected social connections he'd made. That satisfaction lasted precisely until 10:37 a.m., when a sharp knock interrupted his work video call. "Mr. Reeves?" A stern-faced man in a dark suit stood on his porch, flanked by a uniformed police officer. "I'm here representing the Lakeside Estates Homeowners Association. We've received a complaint about unauthorized structural modifications to your property." Thomas felt his stomach drop. Of course, Patricia wouldn't confront him directly again, not when she could use bureaucracy as a weapon. "I was unaware I needed permission to add decorative bricks to my own driveway," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. The HOA representative, his name badge read Walter Simmons, Compliance Officer, consulted his clipboard. According to the covenant, any permanent alteration to street-facing property features requires prior committee approval. He cleared his throat importantly. The complainant has provided photographs showing work being done without permits. Thomas's mind raced. He'd reviewed the HOA rules before starting the project, but had focused primarily on whether he could legally brick around a car parked on his property. The aesthetic approval process had completely slipped his mind. "What happens now?" he asked. "You'll need to submit a retroactive application for approval," Walter explained, his tone suggesting this was a grave inconvenience to everyone involved. "The committee meets next month. In the meantime, you're subject to daily fines of $75 until the matter is resolved." The police officer, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward. "There's also the matter of the complaint about harassment and vehicle imprisonment." "Vehicle imprisonment?" Thomas repeated incredulously. "The complainant alleges that you attempted to trap her car on your property as an act of intimidation." Thomas felt a headache forming behind his eyes. "Officer, she was parking on my property without permission. Repeatedly. I have dated photographs." The officer nodded. "That's between you and the HOA. I'm just here to inform you that if there are any further confrontations, there could be legal consequences." After they left, Thomas sat on his porch steps, staring at the beautifully bordered driveway that was now costing him $75 a day in fines. He pulled out his phone to call Mai, then hesitated. His sister had already given up her weekend to help him. Did he really want to drag her further into this petty neighborhood drama? As he debated what to do, his phone chimed with an email notification. It was from his boss. The Arizona resort was everything the company had promised: spectacular desert views, luxurious accommodations, and team-building activities that were actually enjoyable. Under normal circumstances, Thomas would have been fully engaged in the experience. Instead, he found himself checking his phone during breaks, monitoring the security camera alerts that pinged with regular updates from home. For the first 2 days, nothing noteworthy happened. Patricia's Mercedes remained conspicuously absent from both his driveway and the camera's field of view. Thomas began to wonder if his preparations had been unnecessary. Perhaps the formal letter and threat of towing had been sufficient deterrent after all. On the third day of his trip, during a particularly tedious budget presentation, Thomas's phone vibrated with an alert. He discreetly checked the notification. Motion detected on his driveway camera. The timestamp showed it was mid-morning back home. As soon as the presentation ended, Thomas ducked into a quiet corner of the hotel lobby and pulled up the video. The familiar black Mercedes was clearly visible, backing into his driveway with practiced ease. Patricia emerged, designer handbag in hand, and strode away without a backward glance. Thomas felt a surge of indignation, quickly followed by a strange sense of satisfaction. She had taken the bait. He opened his email and sent a pre-written message to the towing company, attaching the video clip as evidence and authorizing them to proceed as agreed. Then he forwarded the same video to May with the simple message: "It's happening." His sister's response came almost immediately: "Keep me posted. Are you sure this is what you want to do?" Thomas considered the question carefully. Was this petty? Perhaps. But it was also a matter of principle now. He typed back, "Yes. Some lessons need to be expensive to be effective." Throughout his afternoon meetings, Thomas found himself periodically checking his phone. 2 hours after the initial alert, a new notification appeared. This time, the video showed a tow truck maneuvering into position in front of his house. The driver, following the protocol Thomas had established, first placed a call, presumably to the number Thomas had provided for verification, then proceeded to hook up the Mercedes and tow it away. Thomas couldn't help but smile at the efficiency of it all. The entire process had taken less than 10 minutes. That evening, during the retreat's poolside dinner, Thomas's phone lit up with a barrage of notifications. First came a series of motion alerts showing Patricia returning to the empty driveway, her confusion evident as she circled the area where her car had been. Next came her increasingly agitated inspection of the no parking sign, which she apparently noticed for the first time. The final video showed her storming toward his front door, presumably to confront him, only to find the house dark and empty. What the video didn't capture, but Thomas could well imagine, was her discovery of the small lockbox mounted by the side door. Inside was a printed note with the towing company's address and contact information, along with a copy of the letter he had delivered to her mailbox days earlier. The next morning brought a flood of text messages from neighbors. "OMG, Patricia is on the warpath," wrote Helen, the retired teacher. "She's telling everyone you had her kidnapped car." Another neighbor reported that Patricia had been seen arguing with the towing company staff, who apparently refused to release her vehicle until she paid the substantial retrieval fee. A third message, this one from Ryan, was more succinct. "Dude, you're my hero. That woman just got a $350 lesson in property rights." Thomas felt a twinge of guilt, quickly suppressed. He hadn't asked Patricia to park in his driveway. He had, in fact, explicitly asked her not to. The consequences she now faced were entirely of her own making. The rest of the company retreat passed in a blur of seminars and networking events. Thomas participated fully, his mind no longer distracted by the driveway drama unfolding at home. The security camera continued to send alerts, but none showed any further attempts by Patricia to use his driveway. Instead, the footage captured a parade of curious neighbors walking by his house, some pausing to admire the brick border, others clearly gossiping about the situation. On the final evening of the retreat, as Thomas packed for his return flight, he received an unexpected email from the HOA. The subject line read, "At PTGRVD, driveway border modification." The body of the message was brief. "Dear Mr. Reeves, the Architectural Committee has reviewed your application for the ornamental brick border installation and has granted approval, effective immediately. The daily fines assessed will be rescinded." 6 weeks after the driveway incident, Thomas' backyard was filled with the sounds of laughter and conversation. Portable tables dotted the lawn, laden with potluck dishes. Children chased each other through a sprinkler set up in the far corner, and a makeshift cornhole tournament was underway near the fence. The inaugural block party had exceeded all expectations. Nearly every household on the street had contributed something: food, drinks, chairs, games, and the atmosphere was one of genuine community. Thomas, grilling burgers at the patio, felt a sense of belonging he hadn't experienced since moving to the neighborhood 3 years ago. "You started something special here," Helen said, bringing him a cold beer. "We should have done this years ago." Thomas smiled, flipping a row of patties with practiced ease. "Better late than never, and I have to admit, it probably wouldn't have happened without the driveway situation." News of his showdown with Patricia had spread throughout the subdivision, evolving with each retelling until Thomas had become something of a folk hero, the mild-mannered software developer who had outmaneuvered the neighborhood tyrant. He'd done his best to downplay the drama, but he couldn't deny that it had served as a conversation starter with neighbors he might never have met otherwise. Speaking of Patricia, she and her husband had been conspicuously absent from the festivities despite receiving the same invitation as everyone else. Thomas hadn't really expected them to attend, but he'd extended the olive branch nonetheless. "Have you seen the Westfields lately?" he asked Helen. The retired teacher nodded toward the street. "Funny you should ask. Look who just arrived." Thomas turned to see Patricia's husband, David, standing awkwardly at the edge of the yard, a store-bought fruit platter in his hands. Unlike his wife, David was a soft-spoken man who worked as an accountant and generally kept to himself. Thomas had exchanged pleasantries with him a few times before the driveway incident, but knew little about him. "I should go say hello," Thomas said, handing the spatula to Helen. "Can you wash the grill for a minute?" As Thomas approached, David's discomfort was palpable. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, his eyes darting around the gathering. "David, glad you could make it," Thomas greeted him, extending a hand. "Thanks for bringing something." David shook his hand firmly. Patricia sends her regrets. She had a previous engagement. They both knew it was a polite fiction, but Thomas nodded as if he believed it. "Well, you're welcome here. There's beer in the cooler by the patio, and we've got the grill going strong." After a moment of hesitation, David lowered his voice. "I wanted to apologize again for the whole driveway situation. Patricia she sometimes has trouble seeing other perspectives." Thomas waved away the apology. "Water under the bridge. Or bricks under the cars, I guess." The joke earned a small smile from David. "She's not actually on the board of every charity in town, you know," David continued, seemingly needing to explain. "She volunteers at the animal shelter once a month and went to one fundraiser for the Children's Hospital last year." He sighed. "The rest is aspiration rather than reality." Thomas nodded, beginning to understand. Patricia's sense of entitlement stemmed not from actual power or status, but from a desperate desire to appear important. Somehow, that made her behavior both more understandable and more sad. "The invitation stands if she ever wants to join one of these gatherings," Thomas said, genuinely meaning it. "No hard feelings on my part." David looked relieved. "I'll tell her. And for what it's worth, the brick border looks great. Really suits the house." As David moved toward the refreshment table, where several neighbors immediately drew him into conversation, Thomas returned to his grilling duties with a lightened heart. The driveway confrontation had been uncomfortable, even stressful, but the aftermath had brought unexpected gifts, new friendships, community connections, and a stronger sense of his own boundaries. Mai arrived late in the afternoon just as the cornhole tournament was reaching its championship round. She surveyed the lively gathering with obvious approval. Not bad for a guy who used to hide in his house whenever the doorbell rang, she teased, bumping Thomas's shoulder with her own. I still do that sometimes, he admitted. Old habits die hard. But you stood up when it counted, she pointed out. That's what matters. They watched as Ryan, who had partnered with the 8-year-old son of a neighbor, celebrated an improbable victory in the tournament. The boy's delight was infectious, spreading through the gathering like ripples in a pond.